The federal courtroom in Fayetteville, Arkansas, was a theater of stark contrasts. On one side sat the press and public, a sea of muted, anticipatory silence. On the other sat the family, their once televised unity now fractured by the weight of the moment. And in the center, at the defense table, sat Joshua James Duggar, his broad shoulders slumped, the familiar boyishness of his reality TV fame erased by the pallor of incarceration and dread. When the judge spoke, the words were legalese: motion for acquittal, new trial, sentencing guidelines, but their meaning was primal: finality. The desperate last-ditch efforts of his legal team had collapsed. Then came the tears. Not the performative tears of a television confessional, but the raw, helpless tears of a man confronting the unyielding wall of his future. This was not just a legal ruling, it was the final, resounding blow in a years-long saga that saw a paragon of conservative family values exposed as a predator, a beloved public figure unmasked as a criminal. This is the story of how Josh Duggar's desperate moves backfired, leading to that definitive, crushing moment from the bench. To understand the seismic impact of the fall, one must first appreciate the height from which Josh Duggar descended. The 19 Kids and Counting phenomenon detailed the rise of the Duggars from a local curiosity to a national symbol. Described the show's premise: a massive, devout family living by the principles of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, with modesty, courtship, and patriarchal leadership as their guiding stars. They were a beacon for the homeschooling conservative Christian movement. Josh Duggar, the firstborn son and heir apparent, positioned Josh within this narrative. As the eldest son, he was the standard bearer, the one meant to carry the torch. He was presented as a devoted husband to Anna, a young father himself, and even ventured into political lobbying with the Family Research Council, an organization that championed the very family values he was now accused of violating. His public persona was one of goofy, wholesome reliability. The cracks in the foundation, the 2015 scandals, revisit the first major public rupture: the revelation that as a teenager, Josh had molested several underage girls, including his own sisters, and that the family and church elders had handled it internally. The subsequent exposure of his Ashley Madison account, a service for facilitating affairs, shattered his image as a faithful husband. The cancellation of 19 Kids and Counting was the first major consequence, but it was a cultural one, not a legal one. Josh retreated from public life, but the foundation of his world was already terminally compromised. The Homeland Security investigation. Explain how a seemingly routine 2019 cybercrime investigation led to Joshua's doorstep. Detailed the work of special agents who discovered the downloading of child sexual abuse material from a known source. Used technical details, the use of a Linux partition on a Windows computer, the Tor browser, to illustrate his sophistication and intent to conceal his activity. Tracing the digital fingerprint. Describe the meticulous police work, tracking the activity to a specific IP address at a car dealership owned by the Duggar family. The timeline of the downloads, which occurred on days and times Josh was known to be present and alone. The day of reckoning. The arrest. Paint the scene of his arrest in November 2021, the shockwave it sent through his family, his community, and his followers. The initial plea of not guilty and the conditions of his pre-trial release, which confined him to the home of third-party custodians, a stark contrast to his previously unrestricted life. This is the core of the narrative, where the state methodically builds its case and the defense scrambles to counter it. The digital forensics expert, the testimony that was most damning, the explicit description of the files found, the hash values matching known CCAM, and the irrefutable proof that the material was downloaded, viewed, and then deleted on the computer in question. The car dealership employees, their testimony placed Josh at the scene, alone, with access to the specific computer. The Linux partitions. Explain how the prosecution dismantled the defense's hacker theory by demonstrating that the Linux partition was created and managed by someone with administrative access to the machine, Josh himself. The remote access theory, the attempt to pin the crime on a mysterious, unnamed hacker or even a disgruntled former employee who remotely accessed the computer, highlight how this theory was systematically dismantled by the prosecution's experts who found no evidence of a remote intrusion. Attacking the investigation, the attempts to find minor procedural missteps to taint the entire evidence-gathering process. This is the first sign of true desperation. Unable to challenge the evidence itself, challenge how it was obtained. The verdict. Describe the tense atmosphere in the courtroom as the jury read the verdict. Guilty on both counts. The reaction from Josh, a stoic mask beginning to crack, and from Anna, who sat faithfully behind him. The moment the facade of the Duggar family finally and legally shattered. This chapter covers the limbo period between conviction and sentencing, where Josh's legal team made their most desperate moves. The motion for acquittal. This legal Hail Mary, a claim that the government's evidence was so insufficient that no reasonable jury could have convicted, analyzed the legal reasoning or lack thereof, and the judge's swift denial, signaling the strength of the prosecution's case. The motion for a new trial. This is the desperate move the headline refers to. Detail the grounds for this motion, likely focusing on alleged procedural errors, juror misconduct, the infamous incident where a juror was dismissed for having information about a prior molestation allegation, or ineffective assistance of counsel. This was the last chance to undo the verdict. The pre-sentencing report introduced the crucial role of the U.S. Probation Office, which prepared a report calculating Joshua's sentencing guidelines. This report, which likely recommended a sentence of nearly 20 years, was the cold, bureaucratic prelude to the judge's final blow. The defense would have filed objections, trying to chip away at the recommended sentence, arguing for a lower criminal history category, or downplaying the severity of the crime. This is the climactic scene, the fulfillment of the headline's promise. The victim impact statements. Though the direct victims of the CCAM are anonymous, the court can hear from others. Describe the powerful, tearful statements from his sisters, likely read by a prosecutor, detailing the lifelong trauma of his past and present actions, linking the teenage misconduct to the adult criminality. The defense's plea for mercy. Picture his attorneys painting a picture of Josh as a family man, a devout Christian, a good father who deserved a chance at rehabilitation. They would have presented character witnesses from his insular community, all pleading for leniency. The prosecution's demand for justice. Contrast this with the government's argument. They would have emphasized the sadistic and violent nature of the material he possessed, his position of trust which he betrayed, his lack of remorse, and the need to protect the public and deter others. The judge's monologue. This is the moment of truth. The judge would have methodically dismantled the defense's arguments, acknowledging the letters of support but weighing them against the sheer horror of the crime. The judge would have emphasized that the sentence was not for his beliefs or his family's TV show, but for the specific, grievous act of possessing CCIM and the immeasurable harm it perpetuates. Tears in prison. Describe the moment the sentence, 12.5 years, was pronounced. The physical reaction. Josh removing his glasses, his face crumbling, the silent tears streaming down, Anna's stunned horror, the finality of the bailiffs moving in to take him into immediate custody, the gavel's crack, the final blow. The tears in that courtroom were not just for a 12.5-year sentence, but for a life that had veered catastrophically off its scripted path. Josh Duggar's desperate moves, from the Linux partition to the hacker defense to the last-minute legal motions, were all attempts to outsmart a system that ultimately proved far more robust than his own carefully constructed yet deeply flawed reality. The judge's final blow was more than a sentencing mandate. It was a symbolic restoration of order. It affirmed that no amount of fame, political connection, or religious posturing places one above the law. The case of Josh Duggar serves as a grim modern parable that the darkest secrets, even those hidden behind firewalls and family values, have the way of finding the light, and that true justice, though often delayed, arrives with an unyielding and final force. The prison walls that now hold him are not just made of concrete and steel, but of the consequences he spent a lifetime trying to evade.